Major support for Carolina Business Review provided by Grant Thornton. Operating in more than 100 countries, our tax, audit, and advisory professionals specialize in helping companies unlock their growth potential. Colonial Life, providing benefits to employees to help them protect their family, their finances, and their futures. High Point University, the premier life skills university, focused on preparing students for the world as it is going to be. And Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
We can debate almost anything socially and in large groups. When it comes down to the kids, it's a different level of debate. I'm Chris William, and welcome again to the most widely watched and longest-running source of Carolina business, policy, and public affairs, seen each and every week across the Carolinas for almost 30 years now. Thank you for supporting this dialogue. We will start right there. School starts, both primary and higher ed. And as it begins and plans unfold about education, our children are now back in the mix and at higher risk. Later on, we are joined by the Associate Justice for the North Carolina Supreme Court, the Honorable Anita Earls. Please stay with us.
Gratefully acknowledging support by Martin Marietta, a leading provider of natural resource-based building materials, providing the foundation upon which our communities improve and grow. Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, an independent licensee of the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Association. Visit us at southcarolinablues.com. The Duke Endowment, a private foundation enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Barings, a leading global asset management firm dedicated to meeting the evolving investment and capital needs of its clients. Learn more at barings.com. On this edition of Carolina Business Review, Tony Mecia of the Charlotte Ledger, Antjuan Seawright from Blueprint Strategy, and special guest, Anita Earls, Associate Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court and co-chair for the North Carolina Task Force for Racial Equity and Criminal Justice.
And welcome again to Carolina Business Review. Gentlemen, good to see you both, and welcome. Glad that you are safe. Tony, I'm going to start with you. So here we are. It's not quite fall, but for school purposes, it's fall. And there's a lot of fear and gnashing of teeth now that kids and parents are making decisions, are going to school in some cases, and virtually attending in other cases. What do you think? What's the biggest thing behind this fear of a school startup? Is it public health? Is it kids being incorporated into a system or being left out? Where do you think all of this starts?
Well, Chris, that's a great question. I think it comes from a few different places. I mean, obviously you have parents. There are a pretty big cohort of parents who are very concerned about the public health aspects. And, do I send my kid to school and they come back and they bring COVID back home, and I don't want to expose them to that. The other important part of it, though, I think, is really the teachers. And you saw this in Charlotte here, and I think it's played out throughout the Carolinas, maybe throughout the country, where, a lot of the teachers are coming out and saying, we don't really think it's safe to go back. And so, you have a whole bunch of, it's coming really from a bunch of different angles. There's the public health question. There are a lot of unanswered questions. You're seeing schools do a bunch of different things. Over the next few weeks, we're going to see how this plays out. We did a piece in the Charlotte Ledger this week that looked at a lot of the private schools locally are going back in person, or at least partially in person, whereas the public schools are going all remote. So, it's sort of a big experiment to see. There are going to be more cases, and I think everybody realizes there are going to be more cases. We'll just have to see sort of where it goes, but I think it's coming from a few different angles. In Charlotte, you had about a third of the parents saying they want to keep their kids home for the entire semester. And so for school districts, it causes a big logistical headache.
Antjuan, are we missing an opportunity for reasonable, it's not fair to say, but are we missing an opportunity to have reasonable and cooler heads prevail in what the start of school should look like?
Well, I live by the old Southern adage, better safe than sorry. As this pandemic continues to cut through the fabric of every community across this country, in particular in the Carolinas, it disproportionately has impacted communities that look like mine. and you cannot turn down the volume on what that means. My mother and my sister contracted the virus. My sister, thankfully, is over it. So is my mother, but my sister's a high school principal at a small rural high school in South Carolina. I know the fears she faced going back to school next week, in particular, in a few weeks or so, with students who, God knows what situations they may come from. Mm-hmm. You will not find a person more of a bigger proponent for education than Antjuan Seawright. I am the grandson of sharecroppers from South Carolina. My grandparents could not read or write, but they taught us we needed to have an education to be all right. And so this idea that certain people do not want to go back to school is just false. However, I have to think about this from the long-term perspective versus the short-term. Yes, we can still learn online. We just have to make broadband access in this country accessible and affordable for all so we can make learning convenient. I went to school, MBA and an undergraduate degree. There were courses that were online then. Most colleges and universities today have online programs, and people are encouraged and enroll in them by the thousands. I don't know why our leaders at the K through 12 level cannot get on board, because it's actually preparation for what some students may face when they go on to college level learning.
So with broadband access, and Tony, I want to ask you this as well. And I know that's hard to imagine in a place like Charlotte or Raleigh or Columbia or Charleston that has a core, urban core with a lot of high speed access. But would this broadband access issue, if legislators, if Raleigh, if Columbia went ahead and fully funded it, would that go a long way in not fixing, but maybe satisfying a lot of the fear around remote learning?
I think that would help. You know, you can't turn on a dime. That can't happen overnight. And, you know, and I completely understand what Antjuan's saying about, you know, the disparities of this illness. There are also disparities in relation, you know, to broadband access. Even in Charlotte, you know, you have some census tracts where as many as 40% of the households do not have broadband access. Now, the school districts are trying to, you know, improve that. They give you routers or hotspots. But, you know, there's still a lot of inequities, just even if they have the broadband access. You know, you have a lot of communities where, you know, people don't have the luxury of working from home, or they need to go out and they need to work a retail job, or they need to work at the hospital. And you have a lot of questions about childcare. You have a lot of questions about, you know, who's watching the kids. You know, so I mean, there's no great answer here. They're all bad solutions. Everybody wants to be in school. I think because people recognize that's the best place for kids to be and best place to learn. But, you know, there are a lot of big questions here, and there are not a lot of great answers, unfortunately.
Antjuan, how would you handicap that the State House, that South Carolina legislators are going to go ahead and finish final funding for broadband? Wouldn't you guess that would almost be something they couldn't not do?
You would think that a lot of things would be priority. Unfortunately, people are not focused on the focus or prioritizing the priority. And instead, we play, I think, political gymnastics with the things we should not be playing with at all. At the end of the day, we know that broadband to access is not just about the teachers and the learning. It's about economic development. It's about healthcare. It's about infrastructure. It's about the environment. So when you couch all those things together, it makes the Carolinas better and more competitive to our neighboring states and territories that may be around us. I'm hopeful that legislators and lawmakers will see access to broadband as we should see all these issues, not Democrat, Republican, not us versus them, not blue versus red, but community issues, South Carolina issues, United States of America issues, Carolina issues. And as a result, we use this to be, I think, the North Star for the country, showing that we can work together to get things done. That's the only way we're going to change this idea of making access to the American experiment accessible and affordable for all.
If we go a step or two up the education ladder, we end up in higher ed, mostly undergrad, but we end up in higher ed. Tony, Antjuan, both of you, I'd like for you to weigh in on this. Is there some early returns on the returns of kids into higher ed have already shown that there are increased cases because of the close proximity? This seems like a no-brainer. Will colleges and universities have to relent on I'm going to use the term, forcing kids back into close proximity for classes?
Well, I mean, I think you're seeing a lot of them go mostly virtual. I mean, my daughter goes to UNC Chapel Hill. They started classes, and most of her classes are online. They're trying to take sensible precautions while at the same time balancing a whole bunch of different things, including the college's need to have the people on campus and paying tuition and room and board. But I think we're going to have to see how it plays out. Like I said, you're going to see more cases, and the question really for policymakers is: what are they going to do when those cases inevitably increase? Are they going to and there's going to be a lot of media attention on it, and so I don't know. It's a balancing act, I think, between the public health on the one hand, and the economy. They're not totally opposite, but is there a way to open these safely and responsibly, like people want to do, or is the public health risk just too great? And you're seeing, I think, all over the place, a bunch of different experiments in that, and we'll have to see how that plays out over the coming weeks.
Antjuan, is there a better plan for higher ed?
No, I think each university is probably going to take it, probably going to cut their corn, as my mother would say, how they see it. However, I do believe this. We have to be guided by science, we have to be driven by data, and we have to be driven by professionals. If one outbreak happens among young people at a college or university, we know that that's going to rip apart a community, because colleges usually are the nerve center for each community. I think we have to keep that in mind. We also have to keep in mind, unlike K through 12 education, we're not monitoring very closely what students do when they go into a classroom and when they leave, when they come into a dormitory and when they do not. And so it's going to be complicated and very difficult to just keep track. And I hope that all of us will sober ourselves around that notion. Again, I think direction is far more important than speed in this case, and I hope leaders at all levels will understand this when they're making decisions.
And you say direction is horrible. Say that again. Direction is horrible.
Direction is more important than speed. I'd rather us move slowly and get to a place where we need to be versus moving quickly and end up in a place where we do not need to be. I go back to my sister as an example. My sister contracted the virus when this thing first started, maybe in February, March. She likely will not get her smell back as a result. She still has not gotten it back, and she likely will not. My sister's in her 40s. Can you imagine a young college student who may not have their taste, smell, or could have lung damage and so forth because leaders made a mistake of going back too soon, making the wrong decision, and now they're impacted by the rest of their life? Some people who have lung issues who contract this virus. And so I think we just have to think very globally and open-minded about how this impacts every individual. There's no way we can monitor everyone's immune system or know how this virus will impact everyone differently.
Our guest is a past executive director and founder of the Southern Coalition for Social Justice. She was also a deputy assistant attorney general for civil rights in the U.S. Department of Justice in the Clinton administration. She has very wide and deep roots as not just adjudicator, but also someone who is engaged in policy, and certainly in policy in North Carolina. She is Associate Justice on the North Carolina Supreme Court. We welcome now the Honorable Anita Earls. Judge, welcome to the dialogue, and thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You co-chair, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but you co-chair a task force called Racial Equity and Criminal Justice with North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein. Why is that needed, and why now?
Well, the task force was created by Governor Cooper, appointed by the governor, in response to the demonstrations and the calls for criminal justice system reform that followed in the wake of George Floyd's death. Certainly across North Carolina, in cities large and small, people took to the streets to express their frustration. And we had an extraordinary moment where the Chief Justice of our Supreme Court, Sherry Beasley, who is the first African-American woman to serve as Chief Justice in North Carolina, she gave an address, a short but very pointed address, talking about the fact that there are racial disparities in our court system broadly. So that was the spark that demonstrated the need for a task force to come together. And I think the governor was very wise to see that joining policing with what happens in the courts is really important, because they both contribute to outcomes in the criminal justice system. But I would say, on the other hand, that these issues of racial disparities, those are not new. And this is not the first time people inside and outside of government have recognized the need to take account of those. And so the former Chief Justice, Mark Martin, had appointed a commission on the administration of law and justice that had a criminal investigation and adjudication subcommittee that made recommendations about some of the same issues that the task force is now addressing. So the governor was very clear that our mission is not simply to study and produce a report, but to actually implement solutions.
I'm going to open it up for our panel. Tony, please, and then Antjuan.
Sure. Yeah. Just wanted to ask just generally about the administration of justice by the courts coming out of the period, where we have the coronavirus, with us. You have in most of North Carolina have not been able to have jury trials really since March. The Mecklenburg County District Attorney was quoted the other day saying he doesn't know when jury trials might resume. 6 months, 12 months, maybe 15 months, he said. The Constitution guarantees a right to a speedy trial. How can we guarantee people's rights to a speedy trial if you can't have jury trials? And what's the outlook?
So the Chief Justice has been responsible for making these very difficult judgment calls about how do we keep our courts open to the extent possible while also making sure that the public is safe. And we have had numerous courthouses around the state where people have tested positive for COVID-19. So it is a very real concern. I think she is working very hard with the administrative office of the courts to figure out where and how to put in place necessary protections so as much of the court's business as possible can carry on. I would note that most cases are disposed of either through pleas or dismissals. So there are the actual trial is a smaller percentage, but you're absolutely right that particularly if people are in custody awaiting trial, the delays caused by the pandemic are affecting their ability to have a speedy trial. And all I can say is I know that all court officials are doing what they can, and it's got to be very localized. What happens in one courthouse is going to be different from another courthouse. All of our facilities are different, and they're county run, right? The counties run the courthouses that host these trials. So I know there's an effort to move as quickly as possible, but mindful of the need to keep people healthy.
Mm-hmm. Antjuan?
Judge Mr. Clyburn, my mentor, Jim Clyburn, writes in his memoirs that our lives are the sum total of our experiences, and all we will ever be is what our experiences allow. Knowing your life experiences, knowing your history, knowing the moment we're in this country, this inflection moment we're in, how do you think you being on the bench, how does that impact, I think, the things going on around you and some of the decisions you make, knowing that if you were not there, perhaps God knows what may have happened with some of these decisions that will impact generations that you will have to weigh in on?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I think in some ways I would generalize that to the importance of hearing every voice in our democracy. So I'm one of 7. I'm not a single decision maker. And that means that different points of view come to bear on any issue that we decide. And I often get questions about the fact that we elect our judges in North Carolina, which is different from other states. And is that a good thing? And what I can tell you is that what you've hit on, I think, is a bigger influence on our perspective on the issues than what political party we come from. And so even though we are a court currently with 6 Democrats and 1 Republican, you will see numerous 4-3 decisions. I dissent a lot. So I'm a voice of 1, even though I'm in the 6-1 if you were just looking at party. So my point is, yes, our personal experiences do have a role in enabling us to understand the issues that come before us, and that's across the board, whether it is a business court decision about antitrust law, or a torts, automobile accident case, or a contested will, or a civil rights issue. And I think the other thing I would say about my professional background, which I think is also key, is
Absolutely.
that there aren't very many civil rights attorneys who end up in a judicial role. And so while I highly value the fact that one of my colleagues was both a district court judge and a superior court judge, so a trial level judge, Justice Morgan had just yesterday marked his 26th year, I think I'm right, as on the bench in one form or another. That vast experience is useful. But I also would submit that having someone who spent 30 years litigating cases on behalf of communities that previously didn't have a voice in our political process also brings something to the court. So it's the diversity of professional experiences that I think gets us to the best outcome, and I think that's true of our democracy as well, that if everyone participates and contributes giving their best selves, that's how we are strongest as a country.
Madam Justice, I want to come back to something. You used the term tort, and 2/3 of businesses easily in both North and South Carolina are concerned about COVID exposure and tort protection. In other words, being sued because someone got sick at work. How do, and I know that may not bubble up to a Supreme Court level type of decision, but it might. How would you characterize that as being a risk for businesses as well as if it ends up being adjudicated?
Well, I think that is a challenging question, because I can imagine there are proof issues that would arise as they always do in personal injury cases. Has the plaintiff correctly identified what really caused their injury? And I also think that there have been pretty rapidly evolving liability is always premised on negligence. So the business has to. It's not simply that you, at least in the general tort context, there's a workers' compensation world, which is a whole other set of legal rules. But in the general tort context, you have to have been negligent. How that might play out in a workers' compensation tribunal is an entirely different issue. And I guess what I would say is that all of us, every aspect of society, whether it's criminal defendants not getting trials fast, or students not being able to go to school, or people who've lost their jobs through no fault of their own, and through I have two sons. One has a PhD. He lost his job because his job involved interaction with people, which you can't do otherwise. My other son is just a college graduate. His job just fine. He was working from home before the pandemic. So this job loss is cutting across all sorts of economic strata, if you will. And so I guess what I think is businesses are going to experience risk and loss too. That we are all in this together, this pandemic, and we have to pull together and support each other. But I don't think we all are separate, and we'll have to get through it.
We have a couple minutes left, Tony.
I just wanted to ask, following up on some business concerns. I think we're entering a period where the courts are going to be asked to make some very difficult decisions in terms of evictions. People are worried about being able to pay rent, and landowners are going to want seek some evictions, collections. People might not have money, but they've contracted to pay that money. Do the courts have the stomach to do things that are politically unpopular like that in this time?
My sense is that everyone who puts on that robe and swears to uphold the laws and the Constitution is, in the first instance,
committed to applying the law in best faith. So there are going to be multiple points of view and differing opinions. And at the trial level, you have a single judge making a decision, but then at the appellate level, it's a panel and more than one judge. And I think the short answer is yes. I think that what judges will try to do is look at our current governing legal standards and see how do they apply in those particular circumstances, however it arises. And we are in extraordinary times. So we've had to deal with everything from at various levels in our court system, everything from what about inmates who are exposed to the risk of COVID-19? What about law students who want to take the bar exam, but that, that happens in a big room of hundreds of people. Is that safe? Should that be administered? So you're absolutely right that there are tough decisions in extraordinary times, but I think that I haven't sensed that anyone is thinking, okay, how's this going to help my reelection? I think people are trying to do the right thing.
Madam Justice, I wish we had more time, but as always, we put a bunch of information in a very small bag, and you have done a good job with that. Thank you. Thank you for your commitment. Congratulations on your election. And thank you again for all of your leadership. Tony, nice to see you. Antjuan, best of luck to your mom and your sister as they get better. And thank you all for watching. Until next week.
Thank you.
I am Chris William, and we hope your weekend and your family is safe. Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review provided by High Point University, Martin Marietta, Colonial Life, the Duke Endowment, Barings, Grant Thornton, Sunoco, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, and by viewers like you. Thank you.